Hi, Roy here, and welcome again to another edition of the Right Has Left podcast. I am your host, Roy Garten, where we talk all things Trumpism, the Trump White House, the Republican Party. Yes, we even talk about the Democrats. But this has just been a wild ride with Trump's second terms, and each and every week he just gives us so much material to talk about. That's why I have a podcast. A lot of times the mainstream media doesn't cover everything that needs to have what I like to call a deep dive into particular topics, and that's what I attempt to do so on this show. So having said that, let's get right into it, because the first thing we do before we get into all of Trump's little things that he's kind of bungled up this past week with the way he just talks is, of course, the situation in Iran. So let's give a quick update. So Iran's army says any U.S. attack on its nuclear facilities would be treated as a further expansion of the regional war. And, of course, as we're well aware of, the war has, of course, gotten deeper and deeper, and Trump now is going to make a move whether or not he's going to escalate things and, of course, get into maybe perhaps ground troops, boots on the ground. Oil prices is now over $100 a barrel, and that's not making the folks back here home too happy. And again, after President Donald Trump said the U.S. will be hitting the Pixax Mountain underground nuclear site very soon, which, of course, he always says everything is very soon, the attacks have escalated. Now, Jordan's armed forces say they have intercepted and destroyed multiple Iranian attacks, and the United States military said that Tuesday it conducted another night of strikes, and, of course, they have done several more since I began taping this podcast. The conflict so far has cost $37.5 billion, the Pentagon says. And, of course, they're going back to wanting more money. And, again, some of Trump's loyalists and the Republican Senate, of course, don't have a problem with that. Some of them do, though, however. And, of course, the Democrats have a big problem with giving them any more money when he doesn't really have a game plan. Each time he comes back, or Pete Hegseth in particular comes to beg for more money, he doesn't really have a game plan either. They try to nail him down. When's this thing going to end? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And he just songs and dances and thinks that, well, who cares what I'm going to do? Just give us the damn money. So the U.S.-Saudi nuclear deal, that's also kind of soured a little bit. Israeli opposition politicians have criticized the prospect of a U.S.-Saudi civilian nuclear deal after reports the Trump administration has tentatively agreed to allow Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium without enacting international safeguards to prevent weapons development. Now, shipping vessels linked to Israel, the United States of Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia, I should say, together, should avoid transitioning through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden near Yemen. Why? The European Union's naval mission said this is what's going on now. Yemen's Iran-loyal Houthi militant group declared this week that it will impose a blockade on Saudi shipping transitioning through the Bab al-Mandeb, a critical maritime choke point in the region. The EU's naval mission said the risk level for any vessels or shipping companies affiliated with Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the U.S. is high. Now, this includes vessels of any nationality that have recently called at, loaded cargo in, or discharged cargo at Saudi Arabian ports, as such vessels may be perceived as associated with Saudi interests and could therefore be considered potential targets. Now, what this all boils down to, ladies and gentlemen, is, of course, as we deal with the Strait of Hormuz, that is still closed. And now we are getting into the Red Sea, where they're going to block that off as well. So that is why oil is now getting up to $100 a barrel, or even going to exceed that. Now, the market has been responding somewhat soft as far as these price increases. However, that does not necessarily mean that oil cannot continue to, go up even higher and higher. Now, what has been interesting about all of this is, of course, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been relatively quiet about what the United States has been doing to escalate this war with Iran. However, there has been rumors that if Trump does go through a higher escalation, i.e. perhaps boots on the ground or perhaps some attempt to attack certain sites, Bibi will be getting somewhat more involved with the situation. Now, what is interesting here is because of the U.S.-Saudi civilian nuclear agreement, his political opponents have been sharply critical, treating the deal like a strategic disaster. Now, former Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, leader of the Israeli Beitenu Party, had wrote on X, the social media site, that a civilian nuclear program for Saudi Arabia will end with a nuclear weapons and will lead to a wild arms race across the entire Middle East. So, as you can see right there, that kind of makes them a little nervous. The Democrats Party chair, Yair Golan, a retired military general, said the agreement creates a dangerous reality for Israel, accusing Netanyahu of achieving the impossible. He both lost the chance for normalization with Saudi Arabia and enabled it to gain nuclear capabilities. Now, under the Biden administration, nuclear cooperation between the United States and Saudi Arabia was directly linked to the normalization process with Israel, said Yoel Gazansky, a senior fellow at the INSS. So, let's recap here. I don't want to go too much into the war with Iran because it's just a continuous play over and play over and play over. And each and every week, Trump says it's getting better, it's getting worse, it's getting better, it's getting worse. We got a deal. Everything's a damn deal to him. He has to have a deal. That's all he knows. Deal, deal, deal. If we can get a deal done, this will happen. Well, as you know, we've tried several deals, and Trump has gone up and down, and so we don't know what the hell we're doing anymore. The main thing is he's in a mess. He can't seem to find his way out of it, and he's just totally lost. And it's so sad that we have come to this. We've lost people. I'll be going in a little bit later about that, about how Trump showed up for the receivership of our fallen soldiers, and it's sad that it has come to this. And and again, the Pentagon's even kind of bearing the numbers on how many people are actually injured and been hurt since this thing has started. And of course, if we get into a bigger escalation, which looks like it's going to happen, you're going to see oil prices go up. You're going to see food prices go up because of the fertilizer, and nothing's moving in the Strait of Hormuz, and now nothing's moving through the Red Sea, which was kind of a backdoor way to get oil moving, and on it goes. So we have got huge, huge problems. And when is it ever going to end? We who knows? So, having said that, let's just forget about talking about Iran for a little while. I want to take a deep dive into a particular topic that has got a lot of people on their mind, and that's going to be my top story for this week's podcast. And what I want to deep dive into is what people are calling, of course, is our progressive Democrats. And this is kind of exciting stuff. Now, let's start, of course, with the state of New York, where Madami is making huge headlines as he goes about and, gets some progressive Democrats into place. Now, what I want to talk about here, before I go into too much here on the topic, is, as you're well aware of, Trump likes to call the progressive Democrats communists. They're all communists. Trump has not one damn clue what the exact word communist is, except he likes to use it in campaigning with his base because of the term that the Democrats have linked to, and of course that is the word socialist. So what the hell does socialism actually mean with progressive Democrats? And that's what we're going to take our little deep dive into today. I'm going to try to explain to you folks exactly what progressive Democrats are doing, why they are called socialist Democrats, and how it has absolutely zero, and I mean zero, anything to do with communism. So let's go ahead and get into it and try to follow along with this, okay? because you've got to understand the movement is really taking off. A lot of it, of course, is to do with Madami. But as you know, we've had progressive Democrats already as elected officials long before Madami became mayor of New York. AOC is a prime example. A lot of people love AOC. She's young. She's vibrant. You've got another progressive Democrat in Colorado that just got elected. Let me just go back to the slide here so you can kind of see some of the progressive Democrats that are already elected into Congress, and more will be coming your way. So, progressive Democrats are making, as I mentioned, huge strides because they are successfully capitalizing on working class frustration over systematic economic inequality, skyrocketing housing costs, and the corporate influence in politics. Now, the grassroots energy has empowered younger left-leaning candidates to topple powerful Democrat incumbents in key primary elections. The Democratic establishment, what we like to call the old guard, fears this progressive way for three main reasons: ideological disruption. Now, progressives challenge the pragmatism and the incremental changes that moderate Democrats have long championed. Their policy platforms, such as Medicare for all, aggressive climate action, and heavy taxation on extremely wealthy, Bernie Sanders is another example, force the party to move sharply to the left. Electoral vulnerability, centrist Democrats also fear that adopting far-left positions alienates moderate, suburban, and independent swing voters. Now, the establishment argues that pushing a heavily progressive agenda in competitive general elections risks handling crucial swing districts to Republicans, which may or may not happen. The generational shift, the progressives' rise, represents a demand for new institutional power to transfer to a new generation of leaders. Younger voices are accusing the establishment of being out of touch with modern voters and are demanding that party elites step aside. Let's pause there for a minute. Let's talk about that. Why is that important? Well, your congressional delegation of both the Senate and the House are aging out. All right. Everywhere from baby boomers on down to about your 40, 50-year-olds. Our younger voters are up and coming. Your young voters, the 20s. So AOC was in her mid-20s when she first got elected to Congress. Now she's in her early to mid-30s. And Bernie, of course, he is a prime example of perhaps, but he's in a little class all by himself. Bernie's getting up there in age too, and he kind of started this independent progressive Democratic movement. Tax the rich and take care of our own here. Now, so far, if you're following along, you can see some of the ideology that's here, and I haven't got in yet to explain the difference between what democratic socialism and actual communism is, but we'll get to that. So stay with me on this. But the young and up-and-coming voters, the old suitors really need to start stepping aside. You and I are going to be long gone when these young people come up and get into politics. And it's a damn good thing that you got young people who are actually embracing and want to get into politics. I mean, you don't see a lot of them. I mean, John F. Kennedy was a prime example of a man in his youth was taken away from us way too early. And so, when you got young people who want to get into politics and take their rise, into the Congress, good for them. But you get a lot of these old farts that are like, damn, we can't get these young people in here. Look at their crazy ideas. Well, sometimes you need a movement like that. You need crazy ideas, all right? So, again, Democrats, meanwhile, are divided over how much attention Trump's attacks deserved when he calls them communists. Some centrist Democrats do worry that the word communist charge will resonate with enough voters to cause some competitive races and blame the party's recent embrace of Democratic socialist candidates for giving Republicans an opening. Me personally, I don't think that's going to happen. You have seen how many thousands and thousands of people are turning up at these young people's rallies as progressive Democrats. And that is because their voices are not being heard today. They want help for the homeless. They want people to have food on their table and get help if they need it. It's everything that Trump has stripped away from everybody. The housing bill is about the only thing positive that has been done on a bipartisan basis, and Trump even refused to sign that because he's whining and belly aching he wasn't getting his SAFE Act passed. But, that has happened. So that's about the only thing that has been done. But everything else, the poor and the lower middle class have been totally ignored. Thus, the movement of the progressive Democrats and, reinstating health care and Medicare and Medicaid and health care for those who can't afford it, just like other countries that provide free health care for everybody. But you don't see it here. So anyway, moving on, I would hope that Democratic primary voters pick up more mainstream candidates, so they say, because every time they pick a radical, it makes it harder for people elsewhere to run and win, says Matt Bennett, a co-founder of the centrist Democratic organization Third Way. Others argue that trying to distance the party from its left flank only reinforces Trump framing and distracts from the economic message they believe propelled many of those candidates to victory. If running on that agenda invites attacks, I think it would lean into it, says Joseph Greengeese, the executive director of Our Revolution, a liberal group founded by Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, the best way to guard yourself against attacks is to stand for nothing. The electorate wants candidates who are fighting to challenge the status quo. So, again, with Bernie Sanders, you get people who are trying to explain this again. When you get somebody excited and moving, that attracts young people. Young people today want to be radical. They want change. They want to think outside the box. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And when they're not getting the satisfaction that they need from, the base, from, the old style Democratic Party, they begin to change a movement. You got to take this back to Donald Trump. When he first ran and the MAGA movement started moving around, look what it did for him. But now the Make America Great movement is starting to fall apart because Trump has lied and has not come through with any of the promises that he had promised MAGA. And everything from the Epstein files on down. But when it was at its prime, look what it did. Look how many people it put into office. So now you've got the Democrats, younger people who are on fire and making movements and shaking leaves and getting things moving. And now you've got some excitement going on. And that's important when you get stuff like that, because the young people are the ones who are going to be making the changes. You and I, are going to be stepping aside soon. I mean, you got people like Mitch McConnell, who hasn't even been heard of, and you've got a lot of old farts in Congress that they may be powerful, but guess what? There's some changes coming in the wind, and you got to be ready for it. So here we go. But what exactly is the democratic socialism? Here's what you need to know about the DSA and how it got that way. Now, this has been explained by two experts, Maurice Isserman, who is a professor of history at Hamilton College and author of The Other American, The Life of Michael Harrington, a biography of the founder of the Democratic Socialists of America. Michael Kazin is another one. He's a professor of history at Georgetown University and editor of Dissent magazine, as well as a former member of Students for a Democratic Society, SDS. This is a group that's associated with the democratic socialism since the 1960s. And what does it mean to be a democratic socialist in the United States? While the idea of equalizing the distribution of wealth is an old one, the way of doing so is dubbed socialism dates back to the 19th century. The term generally refers to collectively owned businesses and forms of government in which workers and government entities have more control over the means of production and distribution goods versus the private ownership and free market that drives capitalism. American politicians today who are associated with the democratic socialism generally favor the New Deal style programs, believing that programs and government is a force for good in people's lives, that a large European-style welfare state can exist in a capitalist society. They generally support ideas such as labor reform and pro-union policies, tuition-free public universities and trade schools, universal health care, federal job programs, fair taxations that closes loopholes that the wealthiest citizens have found, and using taxes on the rich and corporations to pay for social welfare programs. Of course, the Democratic Socialists of America website has a whole page on this very question, as do the campaign websites for AOC and Salazar, as well as that of Senator Bernie Sanders and other prominent Democratic socialists. Now, when I just read there, what the hell is wrong with that? There is nothing wrong with helping people. There's nothing wrong with having health care for all. we are one of the few capitalist countries here in the United States that makes people take money out of their pockets to pay for health care. Again, Denmark, Sweden, Europe, Canada all have free health care for all. The government pays for that to take care of their own. But here in the United States, we don't want to do that. We got to have lobbyists and all the health care people, the people that make the medications, the druggists. Everybody's got their hands in their pockets. All right. So, Obamacare was the closest thing that we came to for, having free health care for people without having to pay expensive premiums and having to pay a lot of money to get medications that we need. And, free health care has been working just fine. Again, in Denmark and Sweden, they offer free higher education. All right. Here, we got to go into debt $100,000 to pay for our education. And now, I read this past week, I'm not talking about on this podcast, but now with, getting financial aid, they want to eliminate some programs like liberal arts because they feel that if you can make more money doing a tech job, why the hell should we make you go to college and get into a degree for something that you can do? If you can make $30 an hour pushing buttons on an assembly line and that pays more, why the hell do you need a college degree? Go do that job instead of us making you have to put out money to finance you to get through college to the degree in something else that it's a white collar job. Makes no damn sense, but this is what the frick Trump and his cronies think. Money's everything, and having a degree is nothing. Go to work and work for big corporations. I digress, but anyway, I get all fired up about this shit. So I'm sorry, I do, but as you can see, it's ridiculous. So now we're going to get to the key question here. How is democratic socialism different from socialism and communism in the former Soviet Union and other countries abroad? North Korea, an example, Cuba. The simple answer is that the democratic socialists believe in a democracy. I'll say it again. The democratic socialists do believe in a democracy, while communist forms of government are not democracies. Democratic socialists believe in elections. Ooh, they do. The First Amendment. Oh, really? They want ordinary people to have more power in a more democratic system, Kazin says. In communist countries, the state controls everything and a small group of people control the state. I want to pause there. What the hell does that sound like here? We're talking, Trump is calling the Democrats communists. But here's a guy that wants to control our elections. He wants to control our education. He changed the Department of Defense, the Department of War. He wants federalization of the elections. He's got ICE out there rounding up everybody like Gestapo agents. Now, who do you think sounds more like a communist organization being put together than him calling the Democratic Socialist communists? What did I just read there? I think the shoe is on the other foot here now, isn't it, folks? So, but again, confusion is understandable. However, because the USSR stands for the Union of Soviet Social Republics, do you hear that? Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So Trump takes the word socialist out of there and turns around and calls the Democratic Socialist communists. But for context, here's what Kazin explains when the distinction started to be made between socialism and communism. All communists call themselves socialists because they want it on the way to pure communism. But he explains that the Bolshevik revolution in Russia in 1917 caused a split between those who identified primarily as communists and those who identified themselves as socialists. Now, in 1919, the Bolsheviks formed the Continuum Communist International. And so that's when they wanted people to follow in Russia's footsteps, join essentially declaring themselves communists, while the others decided to stick with socialism. Now, some key differences in practice political systems. Democratic socialists participate in multi-party democratic elections and respect constitutional rights, and communist regimes historically do not. All right. Democratic socialists advocate for expanded public services like universal health care and affordable housing and public ownership through reform. Communism historically abolishes private enterprise entirely through centralized state command And the methodology changes under democratic socialisms depend on winning public consent and votes. Traditional communist transitions have relied on revolutionary overthrow and state coercion. Again, like when the Capitol was attacked, remember that? And people died, police officers died. Remember that riot? Could that have been called communism for Trump? Because we had a huge overthrow? That's what the communists do. Remember that? All right. And now Trump wants state-controlled media. He wants ICE agents rounding up everybody's brown skin. He wants to have federalization of elections. And he yells, God bless America. And, he hates media people. He hates people getting into his private business. And, the people's right to know isn't necessary. We don't need a First Amendment. We don't need a Fourth Amendment. We don't need freedom of the press. I would think one particular party sounds more like a communistic type of movement than him declaring the Democratic Socialist Communist. So, I hope that explains things, all right? Because I really wanted to touch on that topic because I'm getting sick and tired of Trump throwing a word around calling Democrat Socialist communists. AOC is not a communist. The mayor of New York is not a communist. The lady who just got elected to office in Colorado is not a communist, okay? So let's go back to this slide one more time. Do you think these people standing here on the steps of the Capitol are communists? Is Bernie Sanders a communist? Is AOC a communist? Look at these folks. I want you to look at them really closely there, all right? I really don't think they're a communist. All right. So let's move on to the news. But I hope you learned something there. Now, Trump used bizarre examples at a Georgia speech recently. President Donald Trump basically accused, again, communists of wanting to destroy Mount Rushmore at a speech at a Georgia high school as he framed communism as a major threat to America, liberty, and criticized Democratic candidates he poses as communists again. Now, watch this video where he says that.
As I said in my recent address at Mount Rushmore recently, I don't know if anybody saw it, such a beautiful place. The communists want to take it down. They tried taking Mount Rushmore down. They want to blow it up. They want to take it down. They shouldn't be up there. These people are crazy. But communism is, in my opinion, the single greatest threat to our country and its history, including even World War I and World War II, Pearl Harbor, 9/11. I think it's the greatest threat that I've ever seen to our country. These people are stone cold crazy.
Now, Trump has previously joked about wanting to put his face on the national landmark despite officials saying expansion is not feasible. Now, he was serious. All right. He may have joked about it, but I'm going to tell you, deep inside, he is dead serious. Nothing would make him happier than if somebody could pay millions of dollars and stick his head on Mount Rushmore. It won't happen. But he's already, he's got this car race happening at the end of August in Washington where we got an Indy 500 style race around. They've already starting to lay the oil for that. It's the most stupidest thing I've ever seen. Penn Station, Trump, there's a movement now to change Penn Station to Trump Station. And here in Florida, of course, we already got Trump International Airport, which is already having millions of problems financially, too, about all the sign changes and stuff. They've run out of money. And, of course, Trump has taken a percentage of sales at the airport. They've got Trump merchandise inside the airport, and he's making money off of that. Trump doesn't do anything for free. Nothing. Everything's a deal, and if it's money in his pocket, he's a happy camper. All right? So, again, President Donald Trump also went on to target Jon Ossoff. Now, this young man, of course, is up for re-election in Georgia. President Donald Trump targeted him. He called him Pinky Herman, which was a mix-up of the 1980s character Pee Wee Herman. Trump can't even remember who the hell Pee Wee Herman is, and he thought he was making a funny joke. Of course, his base was there going, yeah, it's funny. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, but that's funny. Yeah. And I called him a terrible senator. Trump has previously used obscene nicknames for Ossoff on Truth Social. He called him terrible. He claimed he was not respected in Washington, which he is. And he kept saying Pee Herman. He doesn't know Pee Wee Herman because Trump doesn't have his brain's pretty much gone. Now, Trump previously posted insulting variations of the senator's name while backing Republican opponent Mike Collins. And I'm going to tell you right now, Ossoff is up for re-election, and he's going to win. Okay, I can safely bet that. When you start insulting your own state senator, I don't care if and his base, his crowd was not that huge. The cameras was hiding things pretty good about how many people were actually at that rally. Also, if you notice on the close-up, his bronze makeup that he put on terribly was running on his face. He appeared sweaty. His eyes were droopy like he was on something. He had very terrible speech impediments. His speech at times was very incoherent. He was mispronouncing names. He said he wanted to run again for election again, which he legally can't. And of course, the personal attacks came as Ossoff campaigns for elections in a key midterm race against the Trump-endorsed candidate. Representatives Mike Collins, Trump also labeled Democrats and Ossoff as communists during his speech, as I just told you about. And what's even more interesting here, let's go to Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, who's also from Georgia, as you're well aware of. This is interesting. Marjorie Taylor Greene is sounding more and more like, let's say, an ultra-conservative Democrat than a Republican. Although she said she is a Republican for life, she can't stand Donald Trump. But over the weekend, Greene rallied against Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth as well, because he made a post commemorating U.S. service members killed in Jordan by Iranian strikes. Godspeed heroes, she said. And, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene also slammed Trump about his attacks on John. But then she turned around and, made some comments about what was going on when the Ford that returned that was killed over in Iran. And Marjorie got pretty upset. She posted on TikTok and some other social media posts about Trump's terminology about how he said, all the dead soldiers that came back, they all said that we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. They never said that. And the parents of those fallen soldiers even said they never said that. Trump always has to make everything political. Even when it comes to the return of our fallen, Trump's got to get his nose and talk about politics and himself over making the spot and the time of the moment of the fallen. And of course, he's using it for justification of the war. Now, on April 1st, in his primetime address, he spoke about 2 dignified transfers he attended in March, saying, of those fallen service members, we salute them, and now we must honor them by completing the mission for which they gave their lives. And every single one of the people, their loved ones, and of course, he says, please, sir, finish the job. That's what he says they said. When Trump's lying, he can't even remember when he's lying. When he puts one lie on top of another, because again, the parents completely said they never said that. My son or my daughter never said that. He never said that they must not have a bomb. He says this stuff because he's got a gullible base that believes everything that comes out of his mouth. Trump could tell his base, did you know that the sky is actually yellow when you get above 90,000 feet? And his base would go, I didn't know that, Mr. President. And then they'll turn to their friend, Martha, did you know that the sky is yellow at 80,000 feet? Did you just what he said? I didn't know that. These people have been lying to us because Donald Trump said that. So it's got to be true, I'm sorry it's gotten down to that, but I've talked to a lot of people who, and I don't mean this derogatory, but it's true. A lot of Trump supporters here in rural Florida, I don't even know if they finished high school. Maybe they did. I know damn well that a lot of them I talked to never went to college. And when they get on this rant about Donald Trump and say this and that, I swear, like, you have no critical thinking skills. I'm so sorry. You can't argue with them because they just believe it. It's got to be as gospel as dirt. Anything comes out of his mouth. So when he says things like this about our fallen, it just breaks my heart. They do on the transfer that it's sad. But anyway, so Trump also said in the response, Greens said it was unsuitable to call the deaths a sacrifice. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene went on to say, sacrifice? What the are you talking about? They did not willingly sacrifice themselves. They were killed because of the war you, Trump, and the administration are waging on behalf of a foreign country, Israel. The war against Iran, which has raised oil and gas prices, stressed the global economy, and strained the U.S.'s international relations, has proven unpopular with the American public, which is true. In recent polling, according to AAA, the average price of a gallon of gas in the United States is now about $4.06 a gallon, up from about $3.15 this last year. So it's already up almost $1. And so, Marjorie Taylor Greene has raised some valid points. I mean, it is obvious here that Marjorie Taylor Greene hates Donald Trump. He threw her under the bus, and she's been pissed off about it ever since. And if you start watching a lot of her TikTok and stuff, like I said, she's acting more and more like a conservative Democrat than a Republican. And she's going to consider running for office again. I got to take a sip of my coffee here, folks. So she's going to run for office again. Very possibly she may switch parties. I mean, it happens all the time. We've got a guy who's running for the governor, Jolly, here in the state of Florida, who was a former Republican. He's now switched to the Democratic Party. Very conservative Democrat, kind of like what Marjorie Taylor Greene's doing here. And in some polls, he's already ahead of the guy running on the Republican ticket. So it's kind of interesting. So another thing that's going on here in the news that also needs clarification. My wife actually brought this to my attention, and there is a bill that has recently passed before the United States Congress that could tie the U.S. and Israeli militaries far more closely together, deepening their cooperation on weapons research, production, and technology. That's important because when I first read that, and I think my wife did too, it sounded like that the troops, the military Israeli troops and the U.S. troops were going to start fighting side by side on the ground and interacting and, battling Iran together with boots on the ground. They clarified that no, they just want to share technology development to better cooperate initiatives. Now, this the bill that is titled the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, and it appears as Section 224 in the House Armed Services Committee version of the fiscal year 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, and the annual U.S. Defense Policy Bill. If enacted, and again, this has just gone through the House, the provision would mark a significant change in one of the world's closest military relationships, shifting the two countries from a partnership centered largely on U.S. military aid towards one in which their defense industries are more deeply intertwined. Section 224 would require the United States Defense Secretary to appoint an executive agent, a single official, to coordinate military cooperation between the United States and Israel. That work would cover joint research and development, and the shared production of weapons, and the linking of military systems and data. What Congress is trying to do now is to find different ways of entrenching the relationship so deep in America's own defense industrial base that it's impossible to root it out. So said Josh Paul, a former U.S. Department of State official and founder of the advocacy group A New Policy. Said about the controversial provision, a new section of law in the National Defense Authorization Act would give Israel unprecedented access to American technology and would force the United States military to integrate Israeli defense technologies into our own critical military supply chain, giving Israel incredible leverage over America's own defense priorities. Excuse me. I wanted to finish that up. Now, this is scary. I in no way in hell endorse this. And again, it's not law yet. And again, the good thing, it isn't actually boots on the ground, Israeli soldiers, military soldiers fighting tooth and nail, like going into Gaza as American soldiers, although there have been a few signs that has happened. Because as we all know, the Israeli army is corrupt. They have gone into Gaza and shot babies in the head, raped women. They've done it in Iran a little bit. And if you think I'm full of shit, it's true. You can look it up for yourself. You can see the pictures. The Israeli army is corrupt, and they're the ones that are doing the genocide over there. And I think us sharing any kind of technology with Israel is wrong, especially with the man that's in power now. Netanyahu is corrupt. And I know Netanyahu, in that last slide I just showed you, in fact, let me just go back to that because I want you, again, I've talked about this before. Let me see if I can find it here. That's right here. You see what he's standing, putting his thumbs up over, AIPAC? Okay, this guy has bought and paid almost every congressional leader, both in the House and the Senate, by putting millions of dollars in their pocket. There's about 6 to 9 people he has not been able to achieve to do that. AOC, Bernie is some of them. And so that's why what I just talked about gets done, is because he's bought and paid everybody. So they're, when he tells Trump to jump, and Trump says how high, because he bought and paid for everybody. That's why this new thing's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel wants to own the United States. It's not the United States wants to own Israel. They want to own us, and they almost practically do all right now. And then you got stuff like this coming up. So you got to pay attention to this one, folks. You really, really do. Tell your Congress, if you still can, that you don't want this thing to pass. They have no business getting into our classified technology, nor do we have any business sharing any of our technology with Israel. Not right now. I know there's still probably a few good, honest folks in Israel, but they're few and far between. All right, let's move on to these tariffs. Now, Thursday, Trump says he wants to impose new double-digit tariffs on dozens of U.S. trading partners just as the clock runs out on this past Friday on stopgap levies he's imposed after a defeat in the United States Supreme Court. Now, the United States will impose taxes of 10 to 12.5% on imports over 60 countries, charging that they have inadequately enforced bans on goods produced by forced labor. Yeah, forced labor. Trump also has a 50% tariff on Canada on some imports. Now, on Monday, Trump signed 3 proclamations imposing new 50% imports duties on a broad swath of Canadian exports in response to what the White House has alleged as Canada's discriminatory treatment of the United States Congress. Again, that's bullshit, but that's what he says. The United States administration said the levies, which will set to take effect 30 days later on August 19th, are retaliating specifically against Canadian tariffs as quotas on American automobiles, alcohol, and dairy. The new tariffs apply to goods regardless of whether they are covered by the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, the White House said, and that it also would apply on top of existing global tariffs of 10% that are set to expire Friday, and any new tariffs in response to earlier U.S. claims that Canada has taxed forced labor standards. The goods targeted cover a sweeping range of items from Canadian wine and whiskey to cement and hockey sticks. Yeah. So together they amount to approximately $28 billion in trade and 5% of Canada's exports to the United States last year. Now, again, what is surprising here as I roll this video, Canada just recently opened up the Peace Bridge near Detroit that the Trump's been bitching and complaining about, that they say they own the bridge and that Biden sold them a false goods, and that bridge should never be opened and blah, blah, blah. And Canada went ahead and opened it anyway. They basically told Trump to shut up. But this is a beautiful bridge. There was a lot of press coverage on it. And so finally Trump relented and said, fine, go ahead and open up your stupid bridge. I don't care. And also Canada excluded the United States from its ceremony. Trump was not invited, but there was U.S. media there. And so the Gordie Howe International Bridge opened. And again, Trump says, I'll just make up for it with the 50% tariffs I'm putting on you. And Canada disinvented the United States of America to the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge. And that's, Trump says, I don't care. No, there wasn't one U.S. representative at that. There was U.S. media, but nobody from the White House or anywhere else. That's why the tariffs, he's just mad at them. He thought he could bully them into not opening that bridge, but Canada did it anyway. It's kind of funny, actually. So they held a ceremony yesterday to mark the completion. It was $4.7 billion that bridge cost, connecting Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. The bridge is scheduled to open for passenger commercial traffic on Monday. I know. Of course, the White House is very proud of those tariffs. Trump still thinks tariffs is the way to go, and it's kind of sad that Canada was not able to have anybody there that would possibly, you know, represent us and them together. Trump has totally destroyed our relationship with Canada, and the Canadian people. They've said it time after time again. We love you. We love you, America. We love you for the people that are there. We hate, however, how the government is destroying not only Canadian relationships, but they know that they are destroying us here in America. We have had a loving relationship with Canada forever. I mean, there was a time where we could go back and forth across the borders with hardly any issues at all. And the snowbirds also they can't get here either hardly without going through a bunch of paperwork now. I noticed that the Canadians snowbirds are coming down in droves that used to come here. They used to be, you know, they have a winter mobile home court here. It used to be crammed full. Now last winter, they were probably about 40% capacity because of all the paperwork now that Canadians have to fill out just to come here to stay longer than 2 months. And as you're well aware of, snowbirds stay here typically from about October. They first start arriving all the way through about middle of May. And now they're staying shorter for those that even can get here because of the paperwork. And a lot of them are being denied entry in the United States. So it's very, very sad that what that has come to, and that bridge was supposed to be a beautiful thing, a peace offering. And I know I know a lot of folks from Windsor, Canada, and Detroit will be using that bridge. And like I said, the American press was invited, but you know, not so much what was going on with Trump. He was not invited. So let me wind up this podcast with this last tidbit of information. I told you about how Trump was falling apart at that Georgia speech. Well, he bombed last night too at the redo dinner, as they like to call it, the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He knew he was bombing too, and he tried to make a joke that he was bombing. That didn't even work. But you know, they fell flat, his jokes, and he was widely ridiculed for the comedy routine. I don't know who wrote his material, whether he did it himself, but, you know, he looked tired and disheveled, and, you know, it was past his bedtime. But the media did kind of mocking the leader's dismal performance on live TV and across the internet, and some other countries, they even called it a criminal offense. But in the United States, it's the norm, so maybe Trump's speech unwittingly underscored the theme of the dinner, America's robust First Amendment protections. The guy rambled on for almost an hour, not making sense about anything he was saying. And he also insulted the journalist by name, repurposed old nicknames for political opponents. Let's spit that out, Roy. He made a strange number of flat jokes that weren't funny at all and sounded mad at his unnamed writers for giving him weak material to work with. And I know Trump, he'll probably go back and fire them all and maybe even try to get jail sentences on because his stuff didn't work. He says, does anybody even understand this stuff I'm reading? He said at one point, and the answer was generally no. Some of Trump's remarks were vicious, as Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt promised that they would be, but more than anything, the speech was just boring, and boring is one thing Trump never, ever wants to be, but he was. He claimed to be single-handedly keeping the news business afloat, telling the journalists. He says, you know, when I'm gone, you're all going to be broke. Nobody's going to give a damn about anybody else, he said, and proceeded to count how many stories on the New York Times front page are about him. Again, this guy has got a huge problem with his ego. He's condescending. He's got a huge ego. He's a narcissist. Everybody knows that. And when the spotlight's not on him, he gets upset. He thinks he should be in front of the news 24/7. That's Donald Trump. Why he's that way, I know it's a childhood problem, why he acts the way he does, but he does. So anyway, the Correspondents' Dinner was a snooze fest, and it was held at the Waldorf Astoria, which a building Trump once operated at his namesake D.C. hotel and an unofficial clubhouse for his first administration. So the Waldorf Astoria was where that was held. It's been a bad week for Trump. The war, his Georgia speech, His speech is slurred. It was slurred last night. He told terrible jokes. In fact, a lot of the people in the correspondence dinner got up and walked out. They were just tired of it because he was just rambling on, saying nothing. You know, they were on you could see the camera shots. They were on their smartphones, their cell phones, looking at stuff. They didn't give a shit what he was saying. And Trump actually knew they didn't give a shit of what he was saying. And he's probably ready to go home himself. He was tired and looked tired, and he looked disheveled, and that's what we're getting into now in his second term. Well, that's my podcast for today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did giving it to you. I hope you learned something about the so-called socialist Democrats. They are not communists, and if you can look this stuff up for yourself, folks. Anyway, you try to have a good week, and until next time, this is Roy for the White House Love Podcast. You try to stay safe, and I'll be back with you next week with more good news from the Trump administration. Take care.